from ABC News. A special 2-hour edition of This Week with Sam Donaldson and Cokie Roberts.
The portraits of tragedy. America fights back. What lies ahead for our country?
We're at war. There's been an act of war declared upon America by terrorists, and we will respond accordingly.
This morning, we'll bring you the latest from America's leaders. Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld, Attorney General John Ashcroft, and New York Senator Hillary Rodham Clinton.
Plus, New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani, Senate Intelligence Committee members Bob Graham and Richard Shelby, Continental Airlines Chairman Gordon Bethune, and Delta Airlines Chairman Leo Mullen.
That's This Week, featuring George Will. Now from Washington, Sam Donaldson and Cokie Roberts. And from New York, George Stephanopoulos.
Welcome to our program. On this Sunday, the government and the country are slowly turning from the shock and horror of what happened last Tuesday to the grim business of planning the future for terrorist enemies and for American life, Cokie.
That's right, Sam. But the emergency work connected with those attacks is still a top priority today. Are there more terrorists still on the loose in this country who must be hunted down before they can strike? And of course, the recovery work at the attack sites is continuing. George Stephanopoulos has more on that from New York. George?
It's going around the clock, Cokie. And makeshift memorials are cropping up in the streets of New York, and a service for the fallen rescue workers is planned to take place later today at St. Patrick's Cathedral. And Wall Street has run a complete systems check and says it's ready to go at the opening bell tomorrow. We'll have more on all that later in the broadcast, but first we're going to check in on every aspect of this global crisis, starting with the investigation and ABC's John Miller.
Thank you, George. The FBI confirms that a second man has been charged in this case as a material witness. The warrant was issued by a federal magistrate in New York. The FBI is being very tight-lipped about who the man is or what information they believe he could provide. They are still searching for 100 people for questioning in this case. Watch lists have been given to 18,000 police departments and circulated to airports around the country. They're to be matched against flight manifests in case any of these people try to fly either domestically or internationally. The search continues for the black box in the rubble of the World Trade Center. It is the one that they still haven't been able to find out of the planes that crashed, one that they hope may contain more valuable clues. That's it with the investigation at this moment. Now we go to Terry Moran near Camp David with the president.
The president has no public events scheduled at the moment. No meetings we're being told of, and he remains at Camp David, though all that could change. His schedule is still closely guarded. He went to church this morning at the chapel on Camp David. It is said to be one of his favorite places of worship. Yesterday, he chaired a marathon meeting of his national security team, a virtual war cabinet, reviewing the investigation and the potential U.S. response to these attacks. And while we aren't being told much of what went on there, it's clear from officials' comments that those two things go hand in hand. The investigation going not just to build a criminal case, but to convince governments around the world and, if you will, the court of world opinion about the justice of the U.S. response. Finally, the president's also trying to get Americans back to some degree of normal life. I suppose he's doing his part. He's been out walking his dogs. And now for more on what the military is doing, here's John McWethy at the Pentagon.
On one side of the Pentagon, the work to recover bodies is still underway. They have begun a demolition effort trying to knock down the portions of the building that are leaning on other portions, making it unstable. Still 102 people missing in that rubble. They would like to find those remains. Elsewhere in the Pentagon, very serious war planning is underway. We have been told that there are various small cells of military people beginning to pull together various target lists, matching intelligence with capabilities. It is a long and complex process. We have also been told that there are a number of other things underway in this building, but they are warning that whatever the U.S. does is going to be broad, it's going to be intense, and the American people have to prepare themselves not only for one huge set of military strikes, but for a continuing battle. One of the more important developments has been the change in the relationship between the United States and Pakistan. The U.S. has asked for permission to use Pakistani airspace and a number of other important things. And for details on that, we go to my colleague Bob Woodruff, who is in Islamabad, Pakistan.
John, those relations are about to get a lot better. Sources within the Pakistani government tell ABC News that tomorrow a delegation of top diplomats from Pakistan will go to Kandahar in Afghanistan and deliver a message to the Taliban that they better turn over Osama bin Laden within 3 days or face massive strikes from the U.S. government. It is not clear if this message is originating, that this diplomatic mission is originating from the Pakistanis themselves, or they're simply delivering a message from the United States. The Taliban have said over and over again that they will not give up bin Laden, but today they did call a massive meeting on Tuesday of some of their top clerics, possibly 1,000 people, for Tuesday to discuss the defense of the nation. Clearly the noose is tightening around the Taliban now. It is getting very, very hot. Now let's go back to New York City and my colleague Bill Blakemore at the site of the World Trade Center. Bill.
As you can see over my shoulder, the wreckage is still burning and smoldering on the 6th day. Rescuers tell us that when they tunnel into a new area looking for people alive, that sometimes that lets air in and the flames with that new oxygen sometimes flare up again, making their work harder. But they're still going at it, even though nobody has been found alive since the 2nd day, since Wednesday. Engineers and expert rescuers tell us that they know of honeycombs of passages in the basements of the trade towers and other buildings around that, where people could still be trapped alive. So they're still crawling all over the wreckage, working flat out, even though they know that it's virtually certain that none of the more than 4,900 people still missing here will ever be found alive. Now here's Lisa Stark, who covers transportation full-time. She's just outside Washington at Dulles Airport.
Over 1,400 commercial flights are in the air right now, and all of the major airports remain open in the United States, except Washington's Reagan National, which is closed indefinitely. It's not nearly as busy at the airports today as yesterday. We're not seeing those horrendously long lines. The airlines continue to increase the number of flights they are running. Most of the major carriers are operating at least half of their schedule. Delta is up to 70%. The one exception is United. It is operating less than 1/3 of its flights. This has been an economic disaster for the airlines. They are estimating that this week alone, they have lost more than $1 billion. And now let's go back to Sam Donaldson in the studio. Sam?
Thank you, Lisa. Earlier, we heard the president say the country's at war. And talking with reporters at Camp David yesterday, he elaborated on what that means for our enemies.
This act will not stand. We will find those who did it. We will smoke them out of their holes. We will get them running. And we'll bring them to justice.
Joining us now to discuss this is the Secretary of Defense, Donald Rumsfeld, with whom we spoke within the hour. Welcome, Mr. Secretary. Good to see you.
Thank you very much, Sam.
Well, how are we going to smoke them out, as the president says?
Well, by taking the battle to them. The terrorist activity that we experienced this week and that others have experienced over the years is something that strikes just directly at our way of life, the way of life of a free people. And it is, to be realistic, we have to recognize that a terrorist can attack in any time, in any place, using a variety of different techniques. It may be an airplane one day, it may be a ship or a subway or a car. Therefore, the only thing we can do is what the president said. We have to wage a war, and it has to be taken to them where they are, and it will be a broadly based, sustained effort, not in a matter of days or weeks, but over years. People think of the wars we've seen lately, the kind of antiseptic wars where a cruise missile is fired off, shown on television, landing in some smoke and so forth. That is not what this is about.
Okay, that's not what this is about. As you say, the last time people thought about a war involving the United States to any extent, it was the Gulf War. We saw large armies engage each other. That's not this one, is it?
The people we're dealing with have no armies or navies or air forces or battleships or carriers or capital cities even, or high-value targets. What they have is a lot of people. In the case of Al-Qaeda, the network that has been designated as one of the prime suspects, they may be operating in 50 or 60 countries, including the United States. And that means that we will have to use the full weight of the United States government, political, diplomatic, financial, economic, military, and unconventional. And I would underline that.
Let's talk about that, because in 1998, as everyone knows, President Clinton, his administration, lobbed in some cruise missiles at Osama bin Laden. Didn't get him at some of his bases. I take it we're talking about something more than that.
Indeed. This is serious business. We just lost more people than we did at Pearl Harbor. We lost more people than we did all the way up until the Civil War. It is, and it's not over. They are purposeful people. They plan carefully, and we have to get back to our lives, but we have to do it with a heightened state of awareness.
Mr. Secretary, you're not going to tell me, nor should you, anything about military operations, the specifics. I understand that, but I think very clearly you've said that this may require ground forces of some type. If bin Laden hides in that hole that the president talked about, to smoke him out requires men on the ground.
Yeah, I mean, cruise missiles do not get people who are operating in the shadows. We will need to do a host of things. And I should underline, these people, these terrorists, are clever and they're purposeful and they're well-financed. But they cannot function except with the tolerance of other countries, with countries, real states, that do have capitals, that do have armies and navies, and do have high-value targets. And it is the fact that countries around the world have been harboring and permitting the terrorist activities, and in some cases facilitating, in other cases tolerating it, that has to be dealt with as well.
We're told that a delegation from Pakistan is going to Afghanistan on Monday to talk to the leadership of Afghanistan, the Taliban, and say to them very directly that if they don't turn over bin Laden and his associates, they themselves will be at risk.
They themselves, meaning
the
who?
Taliban,
the Pakistanis
the
or the Taliban?
Omar.
Well, my goodness, the Taliban has harbored and fostered and encouraged and assisted the Al-Qaeda network. There's no question about that.
But a cruise missile wouldn't work on them then either. It would also require ground troops.
It will take the full force of our government and our friends around the world, political, economic, financial, military, and unconventional. I'm not going to suggest what kind of operations we might have to contemplate, but we do know that Afghanistan is a country that has been at war for years. It has, I suppose, a GDP per capita of about $800, about the price of a ticket from Washington to L.A. And there are not a lot of high-value cruise missile-type targets there either. And
I bring up the business about ground troops, not just to inflame the situation, but we have already, as other news organizations, perhaps you yourself, received emails from people in this country who worry about the loss of American life, meaning the soldiers and sailors, Marines, and all of the other service personnel. What would you say to people who may have to face more losses on this battlefront against terrorism?
That what this war is about is our way of life, and our way of life is worth losing lives for.
All right.
And the era of antiseptic warfare, planes dropping bombs from 20,000 feet, cruise missiles flying off in the night, no one getting hurt on the United States or the coalition side, that will not work with this enemy, let there be no doubt.
Let me bring up a couple of things. Let me see if I can dismiss one thing immediately, or maybe not. There are some people who are saying a tactical nuclear strike would be used. Can we rule out the use of nuclear weapons?
You know, that subject, we have an amazing accomplishment that's been achieved on the part of human beings. We've had this unbelievably powerful weapon, nuclear weapon, since, 55 years now plus, and it's not been fired in anger since 1945. That's an amazing accomplishment. I think it reflects a sensitivity on the part of successive presidents that they ought to find as many other ways to deal with problems as is possible.
I'll have to think about your answer. I don't think the answer was no.
The answer was that we ought to be very proud of the record of humanity, that we have not used those weapons for 55 years. And we have to find as many ways possible to deal with this serious problem of terrorism. And if Sam, you think of the loss of human life on Tuesday,